Good morning, everyone. Lovely to see everyone here. Can you hear me okay? Hello, Karina. Hello, William. Hello, Bita. Hello, Cheng, Gazelle. Nice to see everyone here. 42 of us so far. JC, hello, JC. Great. Chao Yi. William, are you on the top floor? Shunjiang, hello. Colin Hill in Ontario. Okay, Alex Fu. Hi, William. Hi. Chao Yi. Lenny. Hello, Lenny. Lenny in Malaysia, right? Yes, in KL. Okay. Alex Mock. Okay, Joyce. Joyce is here. Oh, hello, Joyce. Juliana To. Well, it's always I feel like a game show host, you know, when you've got all these contestants or something. Yeah, we're just flipping through the pages right now, and so I'm seeing many of your faces and a lot of names. Some of them, many of them I don't know. Some of them I do. So, Michael and Cito, hello. Very good. Well, Bita, shall we get underway?
Yes, Ajahn, please.
Do you want a little introduction to life at Tisarna right now, or should we just go right into chanting, or what's best for you?
It's your show, Ajahn. It's your show.
Can't hear. Okay. We're of course our autumn is underway now. The leaves have all just about all dropped. We had a lovely, colorful time, and so it's very nice to see. Ajahn Pavaro Dhamma and I and Samanera Nandano were out on Pike Lake again today, paddling on a canoe and kayak out on the lake. We can't do much more of this because it becomes too cold, and also in this season we get a lot of wind, and that makes it very difficult for paddling a boat. So, but it was very lovely to be out there again with Lumpur. And a little bit of news actually on the building front. Some of you may know that there have been plans underway for a couple of years to build a Dhamma hall, a meditation hall. And just in the last week or so, things really began to finalize. So it's been determined that there are enough funds to begin the project. And we have contacted, and we're, I believe, formally contracting with a contractor, a builder, who we're very happy with. He's done some other work for the Sangha, and it's very, very good work. So there are regional officials that have to be contacted and papers signed, and I think engineers have to be involved as well. So there's still a fair bit of process to go through, but I guess we'd say the bottom line is that our hope is to be able to, the modest goal would be to finish all of the septic and excavation work and the foundation, the concrete foundation, to have that all finished by the following winter, so beginning in the spring. And the optimistic goal would be to actually have the building roughed in, but closed in, so with windows and doors in, so that maybe the bhikkhus can continue work on the interior during the winter. So that's the big news that's been occupying. I'm not on the building committee myself, but it's been occupying Lumpur and several of the monks, as well as people who are very much involved with our committee for quite some time. So that's, we're all quite pleased about that, and very grateful to see that there are sufficient funds to begin the project now. because of COVID, actually, the prices of lumber and the logistics for supply are very much impacted. So lumber, I guess, is all 2 to 4 times higher now. And also you have to order further in advance. So ordering things like windows is similar. So where it might have taken 6 weeks at one time to get windows built, especially now it might take 3 months, we'll say. So all of these things have to be factored in. So it's quite a kind of complicated work. So, work that we're grateful to be able to even contemplate, actually. The idea of having a Dhamma hall is rather than our big tent, we have a big white event tent on our grounds, and we put propane burners in there to heat it for Katina celebrations and things. So it's very much a make do kind of thing, and it will make being able to sit in a real Dhamma hall very exciting and very wonderful, actually, to see a large group of people all gathered together and attending to their breath and the words on Dhamma and chanting and that. It's very good. So that's why we're here today. And I thought we would do some chanting to begin. And I think Lumpur usually has us do the Itipiso 3 times. Is he still doing that? Okay, let's do that. That'll get us all kind of, it does bring energy. And you're facing your days here, so it'll bring some good energy into your day and concentration. So let's begin that. Iti piso bhagava arahang samma sambuddho svavicha charana sampanno sugato lokavidu anuttaro purisadhamma sarati sata deva manusanam buddho bhagavati Svakato Bhagavata Dhammo Sanditiko Akaliko Ehipasiko Opanayiko Pachatan Veditabo Vinyuhiti Supatipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Ujjupatipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Nyaya Patipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Samichi Patipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Yadidan Chattari Purisa Yugani Ata Purisa Pugala Esa Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Ahunayo Pahunayo Dakinayo Anjali Karaniyo Anuttarang Bunya Ketan Lokasati Iti Piso Bhagava Arahang Samma Sambuddho Vijja Charana Sambanno Sugato Lokavidu Anuttaro Purisadhamma Sarati Sata Deva Manu Sanam Buddho Bhagavati Svakato Bhagavata Dhammo Sanditiko Akaliko Ehipasiko Opanayiko Pachatan Veditabo Vinyuhiti Supatipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Ujjupatipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Nyaya Patipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Samichi Patipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Yadidan Jattari Purisa Yugani Ata Purisa Pugala Esa Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Ahunayo Pahunayo Dakinayo Anjali Karaniyo Anuttarang Bunya Ketan Lokasati Iti Piso Bhagava Arahang Samma Sambuddho Vija Charana Sampanno Sugato Lokavidu Anuttaro Purisadam Sarati Sata Deva Manu Sanam Buddho Bhagavati Svakato Bhagavata Dhammo Sanditiko Akaliko Ehipasiko Opanayiko Pachatan Veditabo Vinyuhiti Supatipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Ujjupatipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Nyayapatipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Samichi Patipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Yadidang Chattari Purisa Yugani Ata Purisa Pugala Esa Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Ahunayo Pahunayo Dakinayo Anjali Karaniyo Anuttarang Bunya Ketan Lokasati. Very good. Well, I suggest we make yourselves comfortable, and we'll maybe spend 15 minutes or so in meditation. I can ring a bell when that time is up. So just arranging yourself on your seat or cushion or couch or wherever you are so that you're as comfortable as you can be. The body is relaxed in an erect position. Try to find any sources of tension. Just quickly look over the body, beginning with the face, the head, feeling around the eyes and the jaw, moving down the neck, the shoulders, down the back, just seeing that the back is erect without being stiff or rigid. Usually it's helpful to have a little curvature in the lower part of the spine. Soft belly, and the hands on your lap, just relaxed. Down the legs. Can feel the hands themselves. They might be cool, might be warm, maybe they're tingling. Feeling a little self-conscious because we're looking at them. Take 2 or 3 deep breaths. thoughts tend to come and go, and we simply need to be aware of them and let them go. Sensations arise and fall, memories, plans. Whatever it is in your environment, whether the environment is outside of your body or whether that environment involves your own thinking process and so on, just be gentle with it. There's no need to force or to try to force things not to arise in to the attention. But once they have arisen in intention to the attention, simply let them go. It's like they come in the front door and you just quietly usher them to the back door, and out they go again.
Good evening, Ajahn. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Thank you, Ajahn. We'll now formally request for a Dhamma talk. Brahmacaloka Tipati Sampati Katanjalihan Divarang Ayachata Santi Dasatha Parajaka Jatika Desetu Dhamma Anukampi Mampaja.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang sara dhammang sara sanghang namasami. These days, I guess living back in Canada, I find myself reflecting quite often on similarities and differences between Asia and Canada, between Buddhists living here and Buddhists living in Asia, and just the different cultures and and how we approach Dhamma. And of course, being a Westerner myself, I can reflect on my own autobiography, my own life story, which has, in terms of how I came into Dhamma. And I realize that for people living in Asia, many of you have a Chinese background, and Theravada might not have been the kind of tradition that was practiced at home, but still there are forms of Buddhism alive in your home life for many of you, I expect. So that's a very different kind of home life than most Canadians that I'm aware of, including myself, come out of. But it's interesting to reflect on what it is that constitutes what you could call a Buddhist life, what it looks like, what kind of motivations it generates. Everyone presumably has somewhat different, but also somewhat similar aspirations. And we, of course, recognize that people go through stages of life, not only they're in Dhamma itself, but just stages of life. For many people, of course, we all begin as infants and children and under the care of parents or caregivers of some sort. So family life is very, very important. Relations with siblings and with parents is of vital importance, very crucial. Not always the easiest years to experience, and they're very formative, as we know. But still, there they are. They have a great deal of importance. And then, for many people, there's always schooling, of course, education, and various intentions around education, some of which are fulfilled, some of which get thwarted, get married young, or find an interest, takes us quite in a separate direction from what maybe our parents wished us to take, or whether even compared to the one that we thought we would take, and so forth. And then marriage often comes into it for many people, and perhaps the raising of children. Very different experience there for mothers and for fathers. And then we get older, we get more mature. We begin to see life in a broader perspective. The Buddha spoke about three, he called them adipateyang, three authorities or predominant influences in our lives. And two of them are relevant to anyone. The first is the predominant influence, the authority of oneself. And you can think of a child, an infant, for instance. When a baby is very, very young, I mean, they become aware of their surroundings, I guess, rather slowly, or they become aware. They come to understand what their surroundings are rather slowly. But mother is probably first and foremost. Her face comes on the horizon, and the sound of her voice, of course, is extremely important for the small baby, the infant. And gradually, the sounds of the household, I guess, become cognized, become organized, and understandable. But it isn't just an infancy, needless to say. Throughout our lives, we have concerns with the self. For one thing, we've got these bodies that can be lots of fun and take us places and enjoy bicycling and skiing or exercising, and so we enjoy the enthusiasms, I guess, that the body seems to experience, and we take those quite seriously sometimes. Recreation, but the body needs to be fed all the time, several times a day. It needs to be taken to the toilet, and it needs to be cleaned, and the hair needs to be washed, and all of these things need to be, the toenails have to be cut. And so the body takes a great deal of attention. And it's not the same thing to be an infant or a 10-year-old, or going through puberty, or being a young adult, and so forth, or of course being aware of the body as it ages. And so joints begin to be worrisome, or we feel pains cropping up here and there on the body, and we aren't aware of what it is that's causing them. Could just be an ache. It just could be a muscle spasm, or a sore back because of something we did yesterday, or in the back of our minds, it could be something much more serious, the beginnings or the middle even of some very serious, some form of cancer, for instance. I'm sure we've all known stories, and I certainly have, of people who didn't feel particularly poorly, and then a dear friend of mine, he and his wife went on holidays to the States, as they did every year. They were in their 60s at the time, and come back from holidays, and 2 days after coming back from being away for 3 months, I guess, he's going through some terrible spasms, and the color of his face is changing. And anyway, the ambulance comes, and before you know it, he's been diagnosed with cancer. It's already a 3rd stage. They weren't even aware of it. So sometimes these things have a long build-up in our experience, and the concerns, the worries, the treatments go on for years in advance, and sometimes they seem to strike people really quite quickly. So the body has a great deal to say to our experience. and to our understanding of who we are. It means a lot for us to be tall or short or plump or skinny or what have you, to be seen to be very good looking maybe, or to be seen to be rather plain, to have body parts that work really well or not so well. I mean, all of these things matter. And of course they matter increasingly to the world, in the world, in our social environment. So this is the second of these significant authorities, these predominant influences, or what are called adipateyas. So the first is atta. So atta is self. Adipateya is this influence. So the first is atta adipateya, the predominant influence of self. The second is loka. So loka is a word for the world. Loka adipateya. So there's a lot more to living than being aware of how often we need to feed our bodies, of course. We need to earn livings, and some way or another. We need to contribute to society, to families and so forth, one way or another. And this brings us, and something that happens right away in the family, of course, but this brings us increasingly as we mature into the world. Our relations with other people. Whereas at least we hope in a family that our family members, generally speaking, have our interests, at least they do take them to heart. This isn't always so obvious with siblings sometimes, because there's competition and wrangling and arguments of various sorts. But generally speaking, the family, we hope at least, does offer a place of security, some safety, some protection, and some context within which to gain our understanding of ourselves from and within the world. But the world, of course, is populated by people who, some of whom may be very, very decent and encouraging and loving and have take a real interest in us, but others who are completely indifferent to us. So we have that level of social interaction. Various people mean various things to us, and as we grow and as our world expands, as we encounter increasing numbers of people, our circles of friends and family and acquaintances broadens. Our own way of maneuvering in the world and through each day of our experience changes too, because our world is broadening and it is becoming more complex. We recognize increasingly that things that we do and say have real impacts on others. Our interest in education, of course, comes out of this growing urgency when we're maybe in our teens, when we begin to realize that one day we'll need to develop some sort of economic responsibility, because we're going to have to one day be able to feed ourselves, and how will we do that? And so that means getting some education and eventually finding some sort of employment, doing things that we like to do, and what do we like to do? How do we find that out? So these things come to people in various ways, sometimes very quickly, sometimes rather slowly. Some people sort of go kicking and screaming into maturity. They'd rather remain, or they're afraid maybe to, they don't feel they have the resources to enter the world in a more fulsome manner, and so they resist that and try to remain very inward and don't attend as they might to issues of, say, education or livelihood or what have you. We're also learning how to interact with others, of course. All of this is happening at the same time, and a great deal of it is happening unconsciously. We're just, like it or not, we're thrown into the mix and the thrust of daily life in our social worlds. each day, and it isn't always pleasant. There's a lot of competition. There can be dishonesty directed towards us. Things go bump in the night, as we say, and it's difficult. But look, Adhipateya, the predominant influence of the world, in part it also means absorbing and taking on board the values of our world. Okay, so and this is where differences do arise. Of course, the raising of a child from infancy into early childhood and then adulthood, the raising of a child does vary, as we know, from one culture to another. So the differences that may have occurred in your upbringing would be apparent if we compared notes to perhaps the way I was brought up in Canada. So the world has a role in this, but the world around us, the political world, the economic world, all of these things they're complex. They're deeply rooted in our experience of daily life. Some of them aren't easy to sort out. It isn't easy to see where different influences are coming from and how it is that they're impacting us. It's also true that depending we need to take on board the look adhipateya, the predominant influence of the world. We may take that on board and it just becomes absorbed into how it is that we understand life. That's the way life works. So I'm a Canadian man of this and this age, and I have these values, and I don't realize that the values have all been basically fed to me during my life. They've come to me with my daily meal, as it were, and I've just absorbed them. They've just become part of my whole metabolism, my whole outlook on life. I may not be aware of this. Some people that we know, of course, though, have a very critical attitude, or they're much more self-conscious about the influences that they're surrounded by. So when an authority figure, a doctor, a professor, a boss, a neighbor, whatever, if an authority figure has a particular point of view, they listen to it maybe, but they need much more how valuable it is. And maybe we all do this to some extent. We probably do, because one way or another, our views of the world are taking shape and forming and perhaps crystallizing, hardening by the time we're fairly young. Much of it may be in place by the time we're in our early teens. We just think the world does operate in certain ways, or if it doesn't obviously operate in those ways, it ought to. That's the way the world ought to work, because these are our values. We've absorbed them unconsciously, and there it is. But for others, as I say, we look around and we're considering things, and this we might say is an act of a more a kind of a healthier psychology, where at a certain point, even the advice and the worldview of our parents at least comes under reflection. It's open to reflection and some debate. Some of the views that my parents had, hopefully they worked well enough for them, but maybe they don't work so well in this day and age. That I might come to that conclusion. Or I might say, but you know, my mother, my father, they were rather different character. They were different characters from each other, but also their character is different from mine. My needs are a little different, and therefore their worldview doesn't coincide directly with mine. I ought to respect it and understand it as best I can, but I need to be open to other influences, in other words. So we change in this way as well. And we could say this is part of the maturation of a person. This is perhaps a kind of healthy way of going through life, of becoming, of developing as a human being, maturing into adulthood and becoming a person who has something more to offer actually in the world, because we are considering things with the intelligence and the good-heartedness that we have, and coming to conclusions which we are living with, and also evaluating from one day to the next, and so they're refining, in other words. For many years now, I've actually, you sometimes wonder, well, how do we define the Buddhist path, say? And many years ago, I came up with this idea, well, karma is, the Buddha says, at a fundamental level, intention. It's that spark of intention, that kind of motivation that makes us say a certain thing, do a certain thing, even think in certain ways. It's the intention that really is the nub, the core, the spark of karma. And since kamma is so of such fundamental importance to our lives, to how it is that our lives unfold, then it's very important to be aware of intention. And this is one of the great values of meditation, of course. We come to be acquainted at a deeper level, off and on, depending on how our day is going, but we become more and more used to observing our experience in a finer grained way. We see the thoughts and moods a little more clearly as time goes on. We're aware of pain being pain, or pleasure being pleasure, or we're aware of our moods a little more clearly. They may still take us by surprise, and we maybe still have to become reminded by our spouse or our neighbor or whatever that, you seem to be in a kind of bad mood, or you're sort of agitated, or what is it, what's going on with you? We have to be reminded sometimes by people around us, but still, this work of meditation that we give ourselves to does make us more open to the fact that our experience is flavored by various moods, our perceptions of things, and our intentions, and all of this are so important for us to understand, come to grips with. And in doing so, our experience of life becomes more refined. We're aware of things in a finer grained way. And all of this brings us to the third of these adipateyas, the third of the predominant influences. And this, you might say, it is a very big transition from youth, for instance, where there is such an interest in just our own physicality, our experience of each day, what it is we get to eat, and whether we get to have our way, and whether this or that was fun, and so forth. But even as a child, we very quickly come to see that we don't get to do things the way we want to all the time. Our mother doesn't feed us what we really like, our favorite treats all the time. No, things work quite differently. So the world comes into our lives very quickly, very early in life, of course. And as we mature, we understand these things differently. We take them on in a different way. However, when we encounter the Dhamma, and I understand that we encounter the Dhamma in different ways, at a different pace from one another. Some people dive headlong into it. It's a transformative kind of thing, that first acquaintance with what the Dhamma is, what the Buddhist teachings are, a kind of conversion, you might say. to living life in a Dhammic way, living life according to the Buddhist teachings, living life according to the truth. So sometimes it's quite a sudden shift that can occur. And at other times, it is more of a process of maturation. And one way of making the distinction here, for Western Buddhists, I think, it's not so uncommon for someone to have heard about the teachings of the Buddha peripherally, for instance, and then for some reason or another gone to a retreat or gone to hear have gone to and listened to a Dhamma talk. And for whatever reason in that person's life at that time, that Dhamma talk or that retreat, it just sort of ticked off a whole bunch of questions. It responded in a valuable way to many questions that they had. It confirmed many suspicions that they had about the way things are in life, and all of a sudden they find themselves resonating with the Dhamma and leaning into it in an important kind of way. And gradually their life becomes, governed by, in an increasing way, the teachings of the Buddha and the practice of Dhamma and seeing the world and their experience in terms of Dhamma. So that's a kind of sudden way that it can happen. And to some extent that it may be more common in a place like the West because the Buddhist teachings aren't part of our general culture. And so typically a person will have come to them a little bit later in life when they are, you might say, ready for it. In the East, and this is very general, of course, it may be it may be far more common for a person to grow up with it, generally speaking, within the culture. They've seen Buddhist images and they've heard chanting. Maybe the parents have some modest rituals that involve a shrine, for instance. But as a child, you may not really understand very much at all about what your parents are doing or why these elements of ritual life or statuary or whatever occur in the broader society. You pass them on the street sometimes. So it builds up kind of slowly, in other words. It may not make really any difference. It's just another thing in your world, really, in your loka, another element of your loka adhipateya. But in this case too, and probably for all of you here, at some point it does become more important. Again, you might find that maybe it's a particular teacher, a monk or nun that has come to Singapore or wherever you live, and you've really responded strongly to their way of explaining Dhamma, their way of setting it out, organizing it, and for whatever reason, at this time in your life, at that time in your life, it just rang a bell, and that bell has, in a sense, continued to ring since that time, perhaps. Then one of the great advantages to living in a Buddhist culture, because there are lots of people for whom the Dhamma is important, then you've got your social network. You meet other people who go to some of the retreats that you begin to attend, or you find some familiar faces when you regularly listen to this or that person give a Dhamma talk. So as a group begins to form around you. So those are kind of worldly Dhammic concerns, the community of practitioners, the way that I've always been so impressed in the East with the way, in Malaysia, Singapore, brothers and sisters, brother this, sister that, and one person is like Vita here has taken it upon herself to make sure that the Dhamma talks are organized, and she's contacted the monk or nun, and everything runs smoothly, and all of the Zoom issues are resolved, and there are technical people that help out. And anyway, it's a very impressive thing the way this organism just takes life and runs. It feeds on Dhamma, of course. It feeds on the goodwill of one another, of you, but it runs in this impressive way. It has a life of its own. This can happen as well in the West, but the issues are somewhat different. Quite often, that maybe it's fair to say that the needs of Western Buddhists are somewhat different than they are of Asian Buddhists. What I'm interested in, as I say, these are part of the world again. This is Dhamma speaking to the world and the way we're experiencing the world through Dhamma. But there's something far deeper, of course, and that is when our experience of one day and the next, and our experience of the workplace, family life, of relations with spouses or children or neighbors or whomever, when increasingly we're reflecting on how Dhamma speaks into our moment, into our daily life, we're reminding ourselves regularly of the precepts that we undertake. And as we undertake these again and again and again and reflect on them, our understanding of them deepens, it refines. Our understanding of the precepts becomes more mature. And gradually, wisdom around them does deepen as well. When Dhamma becomes a predominant influence in our lives, eventually the lens of Dhamma becomes the natural lens through which we see the world. The world of our own, what were once very selfish concerns, is now seen through the lens of Dhamma. The body, how does Dhamma see the body? Well, first of all, we're always reminding ourselves the body changes. It has needs. It ages, it sickens, eventually it will die. These aren't unnatural occurrences. These aren't somehow out of the ordinary. It's not a strange thing that a body ages, after all. That the joints begin to get a little bit cranky in the mornings, perhaps, or whatever it is. We understand more and more about the nature of the body, and seen through the eyes of Dhamma, we become more spacious with that. Even when there are aches and pains, we come to understand that this is natural, which is not to say that we don't take every measure we can to keep it healthy, to exercise the body. After all, exercising the body, it develops all these positive endorphins, and that elevates the mood of the mind too. So we see that by being responsible and loving and careful around the needs of the body, we actually elevate the moods of the mind. We respect the body in the same way that we respect our minds. So it isn't at all about denying the body. But there is, as I say, this awareness that the body changes, that it is bound to have good days and bad days. It has its nature. We need to attend to it. And over time, it will strengthen in some ways, but eventually it will also begin to weaken in places. And forms of decline will become more or less evident as we age. And that aging might be when we're still in our teens. Of course, even though we expect a human body to last into the 80s now, sometimes they don't. Sometimes for Well, what are natural reasons? Regrettable, of course, when we're aware of this with friends of ours, but sometimes people, when they're very young, sometimes they don't even develop out of infancy. Sometimes babies very, very young die very quickly. Teenagers, accidents, of course, happen. So not only do bodies age and sicken and so forth, but they are vulnerable. They're kind of soft. They yield to blunt objects and to falls on sharp objects and so on and so forth. So they need to be cared for in this way too, because they're vulnerable to the indifference of the material world, physical world, the laws of physics. Then the social world, the lokadipateya, those predominant influences of the world, they are also seen through the predominant influence, the authority of Dhamma, the truth. Here again, as we practice, one of the basic things that we're attending to regularly, as we practice our virtue, and as our virtue becomes more and more sound, more and more understanding, more wise, more grounded, stronger, more robust, it does transform the way that we live in the world. There are many consequences to this. One is that without our even understanding it or recognizing it sometimes, people can see that they can trust such a person. So people tend to be more trustworthy of a person who is living in very ethical ways, and for whom we'll say the injunction around wrong speech has been practiced, worked with for perhaps decades. The karmic consequence of this will be that a person to share secrets with you, something that they want to get off their chest, perhaps, or just to gain more understanding of something that happened to them that they don't really understand or feel comfortable with, but perhaps they feel comfortable in sharing it with such a person. Having Dhamma as a predominant influence also means that other practices, so besides the virtue that we're cultivating on a daily basis, but practices around loving kindness, opening of the heart. People feel this too, and we feel it because our movement through the world becomes colored by, you could say softened by, but made more, there is more and more integrity to the way that we live in the world. And so our experience of the world is much better. Person who is open-hearted, is honest and kind, takes an interest in the welfare of others, is a trustworthy and considerate friend. Such a person just becomes more and more a treasure, really, to other people, those who can appreciate, who recognize these qualities in this person. So engaging with the Dhamma in this way, having it become a predominant influence, the predominant influence in one's life, does not mean that we have no interest anymore in ourself, in the ways of the body, in our own experience. It doesn't mean that we have to stop enjoying a good cup of coffee and a piece of carrot cake or something. It doesn't mean that. But we do become more mature about the needs of the body and the kind of what can be the selfish interests that and enjoyments that we undertake. Maybe we're more prone to always want to share a cup of coffee with a friend. I like a cup of coffee now, but it's never quite as good unless I have a friend with me. Who can I invite over? One of those things. So even at this level, this kind of fundamental or kind of rudimentary level, the Dhamma can have a say in this. Generosity, of course, this is another, needless to say, this is another dimension of Buddhist life in Asia that has always been very, very touching and endearing to me, is to see the degree to which dana, generosity, is ingrained into people at youth. It becomes natural. It's so enjoyable and to watch, but you can see, I can feel as you know, very often I've been the recipient of such generosity, and I can feel the joy, the graciousness, and the joy that comes with the act of giving. And this is, you know, this has a lot to do with the good influence of your families, I think, and that the education around generosity, which began, you know, from infancy very often. I recall, you know, going on Vindabad, of course, and Grandpa's got his little granddaughter on his lap, and he's helping her drop things into the bowl. You know, it begins right there. We all know, of course, that babies, once they enjoy something to eat and they see mother or father or someone, they want to stick something in mama's mouth as well, because that the free flow of giving is quite natural, it seems, in our youth. When the Dhamma becomes a predominant influence in this way, it forms and deepens, matures a person's character, I think, in such a way that no part of one's life is left out of this lens, out of this viewpoint, out of this way of acting, a way of thinking, a way of speaking, because it becomes natural. It becomes natural. You may have heard, I sometimes think of this little quotation. It's from an Israeli kind of genius who is a physicist, but he ended up making a big contribution in physical health, and through a huge series of very sophisticated exercises. So people who, I guess he was really quite a genius in this. His name was Feldenkrais. Anyway, the quotation goes like this, and what the quotation speaks to is the value of practice, the profundity of practice, of doing something again and again. The profundity of conditionality, causes and conditions. When those causes and conditions are in place, it becomes possible and even natural to do certain things. So it goes like this. He says, and he's referring, of course, to physical activity, but the implication is far deeper than this. He said, what you'll find from doing this, and you can replace his exercise with the practice of Dhamma. What you find with this exercise is that what was once impossible becomes possible. And what was possible becomes easy. And what was easy becomes elegant. See the way that goes? What was impossible becomes possible to do something. And if it was possible for you already, it becomes easy. So the practice in the right kind of way makes something easy. And some things, of course, that we already do very well, they're easy. But if we practice them in the right kind of way, with the right kind of attention, they become elegant. And I think this is what we see in, and I'm thinking of certain senior monks that I've had the privilege of being around. I mean, I don't think anyone who has been around Lumpur Liam for any period of time And he is the, as many of you know, the abbot of Wat Pah Pong. He is a highly developed spiritual being of some deep renown, actually. You think of a person who has lived in a community for, it has to be close to 60 years, maybe more. And so he's lived with other people for that long, and for as long as anyone can remember, you know, and I'm sure he's lived around, he's living even right now with some people who have known him for 40, 50 years. Lumpur Samedo has known him for 50 years. You think of someone, and you can say with kind of confidence, because people have lived around him for 20 hours a day for this length of time. They've never seen him angry, for instance. And he's a person, when I think of someone who lives with Dhamma as a predominant influence, he's someone who I think of his life, and I'm speaking of and my observation of him is quite simple. I've been around him a few dozen times, and I've never lived around him, and I don't speak his language, and I'm just observing him with a faithful kind of air and a lot of loving respect, of course. But he's someone who for me is basically a perfect example of a person who lives elegantly with the Dhamma. There's no difference between what Lumpur Liam wants and what the Dhamma would have him want, or what would be wise to witness or that circumstance. It's just Dhamma is the only thing that comes through him. So there's if I have a vote for one person, and there may be a few more, but such a person is Lumpur Liam in my simple experience of him. So these are the three authorities that we have, the three predominant influences, and obviously they all take effort. It takes effort to look after ourselves, and even for a narcissistic person who really their concern is ultimately only about themselves, it takes effort to get to get the world to work in the way they want. For a person whose only concern is the way the world, you know, the worldly values of success and so forth, we know that takes a lot of effort. Unfortunately, we see again and again and again, and many of you have probably observed this in your own experience, that when Lokadipateya, the predominant influence of the world, is really the only true influence that you have, and you're always trying to come up to the expectations of the world around you, maybe to the views of your parents, to the understandings that your society has of success. How much money do I need to make each year? And with inflation, of course, that's going to go up each year. What kind of house do I need to live in? These are, there's a real tyranny to following these kinds of rules, because they never go away, and we never satisfy them either. Because once we get a house of this size, or a car of this type, or a job of this stature, there's always the next one. There's always a better car or a bigger house, a more demanding and prestigious job. It is to follow Lokadipateya at this level is to be in the midst of a real tyranny, a tyranny where the tyrant has no interest in your welfare, really. I should say too that in the place of Dhammadipatteya, we could also put Christianity, or we could put any one of, I suppose, dozens of spiritual viewpoints, other religious perspectives, for instance, because of course we know that other people are governed by forms of life which have a kind of transcendent goal. They may not satisfy us, but nevertheless, these goals can be quite lofty and very laudable. Insofar as I think all spiritual practices that I'm aware of do speak to the issue of sincerely practicing virtue, morality. Buddhism isn't the only form of practice that lauds the importance of generosity, for instance. Far from it. So we have to understand that in that third category, there are other religious or spiritual traditions that would fit. What we simply see, though, as Buddhists, is that the way of organizing reality, the way of understanding reality, and as a faithful Buddhist, we could say the way the Buddha realized reality actually to be, what he realized in his awakening, was something of profundity, which is to one degree or another unique. And so we give it faith for reasons of this kind. Which is not to say that probably any of us are, each day when we get up in the morning, once again choosing, let's see, am I a Buddhist or am I a Christian, or is Confucian values more fitting to me? Or no, for whatever reason, we encounter the Dhamma through texts or through listening, through practice, through meditation retreats, we encounter, and we make it our tradition. It isn't someone else's tradition. It isn't some foreign thing that we have to live up to. No, we educate ourselves through the words of others and through our own reflection and reading. We educate ourselves in terms of what the Dhamma is, what its importance is, and it speaks to us where we are. So this or that person's experience and practice of the Dhamma are bound to be somewhat different, because they are attending to Dhamma according to their needs, according to their personality, their particular configuration of needs and issues, and where they are in life, how mature they are spiritually speaking. You might say what kinds of barami they came into this life with, and so on and so forth. So we do practice in our own way. We have to take responsibility for practicing as is best for us. Yes, we listen to Dhamma talks and we follow the teachings of others regarding the refinements of practice and so on. But still, it's us who each day have to intend to begin again, to reflect on what it is that we're doing, to remind ourselves of what the various precepts are, to remind ourselves which of the baramis we really resonate and want to cultivate more and more. So you might say we customize it, but having said that, something you've probably observed before, the Dhamma is, some of you might even know of fractal geometry, but this is quite in vogue a number of years ago. But fractals, they produce these beautiful patterns, very, very complex and elaborate patterns, which come out of particular computations of this form of geometry. I don't understand mathematics any more than what I can say in those few words, but in any case, they produce these very, very complex patterns. Okay. Now, one of the characteristics of these fractals, we'll say, is that if you say you have a piece of paper, an 8.5, a piece of A2 or A4 paper, and it's full of this beautiful piece of geometry, different colors and patterns. Apparently, if you were to zero in, so you take a magnifying glass on a centimeter square of that whole pattern will replicate. So you get the same thing again, and you can keep doing that. So what I'm saying here is that a fractal is something that anywhere you look, it has a wholeness to it, a deep, profound integrity. Anywhere you look in that fractal, you'll find the same pattern replicating. Well, the Dhamma is like that. So in spite of what I just said, in a sense, we're customizing our practice. We're locating things that we need to do a little better. We want to become a little better at this or that. We're observing things that we do well and bringing some uplift to our hearts because we recognize that we recognize that we celebrate this in ourselves. So this person and that person and another person's experience of the Dhamma, their particular way of engaging in the Dhamma are going to differ. But what I'm saying is the Dhamma is like a fractal. It's one thing all the way through. Dhamma is one thing all the way through. So even when practice seems to differ with individuals, you're doing the right thing. You're doing what you need to be doing at this time. And I think we can have some confidence, have some faith that it is leading us into the wholeness of Dhamma. So the greater insights, the deep insights that we are aware of, the insights into impermanence, into the nature of suffering, of unsatisfactoriness, and into the nature of non-selfness. Those speak to the very element of geometry of this practice. But whatever we're doing it sincerely, with ethical sensitivity, with clarity, with an increasing reckoning for where the heart belongs in practice, for an appreciation for things like loving kindness, sympathetic joy, compassion, equanimity, all of these things. The Dhamma as a whole is somehow speaking in our practice. And we may not be aware of what this or that person is aware of in their practice, but that's okay because we are engaging at whatever level, we are engaging with the Dhamma as a whole. And we're doing what we need to do. So I think I'll leave my reflections there with my best wishes.
Thank you, Ajahn. Let's all say 3 sadhus together. Hantamayam ovadakatha sadhu karang kadamase. Sadhu, sadhu.